Good morning, everyone. We will start in 1 minute. We're going to start in 1 minute. Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this morning's advocacy webinar. This is JP Dorval, Manager of Legislative Affairs and Administrative Services here at Prevention Action Alliance. We actually have a full house today. We have Derek Longmeier from PG&O and also Nathan Kraatz and our Executive Director, Marcie Seidel, as well. So it should be a full presentation today. First, we're going to have Nathan talk about the vaping illnesses. I know a lot of you are interested in that, so I'll have him take it away.
Thanks, JP, and thank you all for joining us today. I just wanted to lead off with last Friday, the CDC announced that vitamin E acetate had been found in all 29 fluid samples they've taken from patients' lungs in the middle of the vaping outbreak. More than 2,000 people have fallen ill. I believe the death toll has risen to 39 as of last Thursday. But vitamin E acetate is the only chemical of concern they've been able to find in every patient. This confirms some earlier findings from the state of New York. And it's starting to paint a fuller picture of what's really going on here chemically and what's going on that's hurting these patients. There also have been different reports. Apparently, a teen has had to receive a double lung transplant, which I didn't even know was possible because of the damage caused to the lungs from this. And it's just a really stark and powerful reminder of the fact that what we don't know about these vapes can, in fact, hurt us, and that what chemicals may be safe for ingestion, many of these chemicals are safe for ingestion, like vitamin E acetate, are not safe for inhalation. And you don't know what happens when you start vaporizing things. You can cause chemical reactions that can create new chemicals that no one is aware of. Vitamin E is generally used as an additive, more of a filler, to lower the cost of production for vaping. And it's important to note as well, I think, that the Ohio Medical Marijuana Control Program has decided to ban its use. My understanding is that it was not yet in use in Ohio for legal means, but now it is specifically on lists of disallowed ingredients. Additionally, we'll be sending out the advocacy newsletter later today. There are going to be some interesting news articles in there about vitamin E and other vaping issues. I'd also like to point out to last week's legislative update, there was a big story in there about Juul, an executive at that company, blew the whistle about contaminated menthol or mint, I forget which, pods, and was summarily fired and is now bringing a lawsuit saying that he was fired because he blew the whistle over these issues and is suing for improper termination and retaliation. If those stories are true, they're very important. This week we've got a news article about crap, my mind just went blank. This week we have a news article about another story involving Juul, that they knew for years that their products were addicting teenagers. Specifically, they were receiving phone calls from teenagers saying that they were hooked and that they needed to find more, and they couldn't get it, and they were wanting to know from Juul employees where they could get more pods, even though they were underage. So these are just more things to kind of follow and to keep on top of. It seems like employees at Juul maybe may have known for a long time about this and are just now starting to come out and say that it's inappropriate. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Nathan. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to send them at the end of the webinar. I will send all responses to the group afterwards. So moving on, we are actually going to have Derek talk about gambling legislation that's currently going through the General Assembly through both the House and the Senate. So I'm going to let him take that away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. We have two exciting bills that would legalize sports wagering in Ohio. We have House Bill 194 and Senate Bill 111. Both were introduced back in March, and House Bill 194 was assigned to committee and was getting hearings moving pretty quickly, and Senate Bill 111 just kind of was introduced and then hung out in limbo for quite some time. However, the Senate bill just got picked up and will be having its second hearing, I think, next week. So moving right along there. A little bit of information related to the sports betting bill. Back, a year and a half ago now, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that federally sports betting was not illegal. So important distinction there that it didn't legalize sports betting, but it just said that it couldn't be if it wasn't illegal. So then that really left it up to the states to proceed with legalizing sports wagering within those states. And as we look at just the national landscape related to sports betting, we're kind of getting circled in Ohio with sports betting in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, Indiana, and looks like Michigan's going to be coming on board pretty soon. So we're getting a lot of pressure from the state legislature is getting a lot of pressure to legalize, and they look at it from a variety of aspects. One being that they get additional tax revenue if they legalize sports wagering, and then kind of the other predominant notion is to stamp out the black market. And we know that when we increase access to a product, then that also increases participation. And based on our surveys that we've done related to gambling prevalence within Ohio before the casinos and racinos opened, that the more access there is, the more rates of problem gambling and disordered gambling that will result. So some big issues related to the bill. Both bills are 21 plus for sports wagering, which is something that we strongly advocate for. Both would also allow for sports betting for U.S. sports as well as collegiate sports and amateur sports. That's an area that we're really concerned with. If we look at sports wagering from U.S. professional sports only, that seems to make a lot more sense given where we are and the ability for whichever regulatory body to be responsible for that regulation. Because this isn't the sports betting back in the day that I'm going to say Ohio State's going to beat the University of whatever little town. This will really be, I'm going to wager on the next down, whether or not the shoes that the star quarterback wears is pink. It really can be very broad as to what these wagers could entail. And right now, that really opens it up for pretty much anything you can think of. So we really want to make sure that it's limited to U.S. professional sports. If after we get down the road a little bit and want to broaden it to other sports, that's something that PG&O wouldn't be opposed to. But as we look at the variety of options that are being available and the amount of types that are going to be available, as well as pretty much anything you can imagine to gamble on, something that we're certainly concerned with. Another component of the legislation for both House Bill 194 and Senate Bill 111 is that would allow for mobile wagering. So this would be really the broadest expansion of gambling that we've seen in our state ever, for being that gambling then could be available in the palm of your hands 24/7, and that's certainly something that we're concerned with. The two biggest areas of the bills that vary come around who regulates. Under the House version, the Ohio Lottery Commission would be the regulatory authority, and all proceeds from sports betting would be directed to the Ohio Lottery's Education Fund, whereas the Senate version would use the Casino Control Commission as the regulatory authority. It's our perspective that just based on the type of background the Casino Control Commission has, that they would be the better regulator as we look at these complex issues related to sports betting. And we know that it's complex, but it's Also good to know that your elected officials are realizing that it's complex, because through each of the hearings, that's kind of the common refrain of, oh, this is a complex issue. Yes, it is. So really focusing on complex issues with the Casino Control Commission being that regulatory authority. When you look at a roll of scratch-off tickets, whatever that might be, there is a very clear odds that will be won and proceeds generated from that. Whereas when we look at other forms of more complex gambling, such as with sports betting, but also along the lines of poker or blackjack, the odds are varied, and there's a lot more complexities that go into it and a lot more stringent regulation that's required regarding that. So for that reason, we think the Casino Control Commission would be a better regulator. Additionally, the Casino Control Commission's one job is regulation, where with the Ohio Lottery Commission, the mission of the Lottery Commission is to generate revenue and not regulate gambling products. So they're in that weird spot of being both the group that promotes gambling within the state and then also the self-regulator. And we know that that's an awkward position to be in, and certainly something that we don't think is fair for the lottery to be put in that position. So again, we think the Casino Control Commission would be a better place for that, which would be in the Senate Bill 111. One piece of House Bill 194 that we see as important is that 2% of the gross tax revenue would be directed to problem gambling support services, and that is not in the Senate bill. So as we know from our data, before the casinos and racinos opened, we saw a 100% increase in the rates of problem gambling and disordered gambling since the casinos and racinos opened, as well as Keno. So we know that we're going to have additional people that will be negatively impacted by this. So it's critical that we have resources available to help support those that will be impacted, as well as funding for the prevention services that will be needed to really promote what responsible gambling looks like, as well as ways to prevent challenges with gambling. So 2% is consistent with what we have with the casino tax revenue, and that's something that we see that should be carried over to any additional sports wagering, whether that be a sports or any additional legislation, whether that be sports wagering or other expansion. And speaking of other expansion, we also have House Bill 282 that's been introduced, which would allow for electronic instant bingo devices. So if you look at electronic instant bingo devices and you look at a slot machine, they're pretty similar, but this would fit within the charitable division of the Attorney General's office, and anyone with a bingo license would then be eligible, depending on the bingo license, would be eligible to offer these electronic games as well. Certainly we have concerns with that aspect, given that currently there's no restrictions or no requirements for training related to responsible gambling for any of the charitable gaming. And given the current legislation, there's no restrictions on the number of machines that can be available. So as we look at the lottery machines that are currently in place at some of these charitable organizations, many of them are VFW, fraternal organizations, other veterans clubs, etc., that with the lottery products that we have now, as we look at the instant bingo devices, and then one thing I failed to mention with the sports betting bill under the House version, it would also allow for sports betting kiosks at all of the fraternal and veterans clubs. So with all of these different machines that will be available, these properties are going to start looking like mini casinos, and that's certainly something that we are concerned with, certainly from an age verification standpoint, from a access and availability standpoint, as well as from a voluntary exclusion standpoint. So within the 4 casinos and 7 racinos, we have a statewide voluntary exclusion program, whereas if I have a problem with gambling, I can go and self-exclude myself from 1 year, 5 years, or lifetime, and those same procedures aren't in place with the veterans and fraternal clubs. An additional problem that we see is, as we look at kind of opening that door with the veterans and fraternal clubs, it could be then expanded to anyone that has a lottery license, which would be any carry-out, many grocery stores. I mean, it would really open the floodgates. So those are some of the areas that we're following. If you're not currently receiving emails from PGNO, feel free to reach out to me at dlongmeier@pgnohio.org. Be happy to get you added to our distribution list, and then as you get the communications from Prevention Action Alliance, you'll get additional information related to these bills as well. But a lot going on in the State House related to gambling, and we're here to answer any questions that you have and keep you up to date. With that, I'll turn things over to, I think, Marcie.
Well, thank you, Derek, for that. And one question that I do have actually is, where currently are these bills in the committee process?
Great question. So with House Bill 194, it was assigned to the House Finance Committee, and I think they're having its 9th hearing. Or actually, it's a different bill. It's had, I think, 8 hearings, and the big issue with this bill seems to be whether or not league data is going to be required, which gets into a whole different level of complexities, but really doesn't fit within the prevention scope of things or what we're advocating for. Another area that has gotten some increasing pressures related to the collegiate sports. The colleges have come out and said, we do not want you allowing sports betting for our colleges. So they're kind of really working through that. So from the House version, it's been assigned to the House Finance Committee. The Senate version has been assigned to, I can't remember the name of the committee, but government oversight or something to that degree. That's had 2 hearings now, and we'll look to having additional hearings there. So that's kind of where that's at for House Bill 282, which would be the instant electronic bingo bill. That's also been assigned to the House Finance Committee, and its 3rd hearing is today, right now actually. So that's kind of where the bills are. We expect that the House Bill for House Bill 194 for sports betting will get out of committee before they break for the winter break, and Senate bill, it's pretty early to see where that might go.
Awesome, thank you for that. And before I pass it on to Marcie, I have a few things to touch on very quickly. First off, just want to list a few bills to watch. Obviously, HB 194 is on there, but don't forget about Senate Bill 111 and House Bill 282. We have the Health Education Standards bills, HB 165 and Senate Bill 121. Senate Bill 121, I believe, as of right now, has had both proponent, opponent, and sponsor testimony, and it's currently in the Senate. I think they're hoping to get it out of the Senate and into the House by the start of the new year. And when it comes to House Bill 10 and House Bill 12, as a reminder, both of these are priority bills for the House. House Bill 10 passed out of, I believe it's government oversight, but it's currently in the Senate Finance Committee, and what they're discussing right now is whether the appropriation, which is 5.5 for 2 fiscal years, so $11 million in total, whether that appropriation is appropriate. And that's a discussion that's happening right now to see if that's the right number, if they need to bring the number down or bring the number up. So that's the discussion that's happening right now. And House Bill 12 is having a 2nd hearing this week, and I believe it is proponent testimony. So if you guys have any questions about that, just let me know. There is an adult use cannabis bill currently being drafted in the House. The sponsor is Representative Juanita Brent. And just a few quick points from the bill. There isn't language as of yet, but based on the summary that Marcie and I received, this bill would create a division of cannabis control. It would create a home grow program, and it would create a cannabis control fund, which would have an excise tax of 1.5%. I was able to sit in on one of the interested party meetings for this bill. And one thing that stuck out to me was the bill as it currently reads, and this is just based on the summary, it severely lacks child safety protections and regulatory language. And by that I mean, for the home grow program, for example, the bill states that you need to keep any plants. I believe each home grower can grow up to 6 plants, but you need to keep any plants of marijuana paraphernalia away from children under the age of 21. But there is no system in place to make sure that individuals who sign up for that program are actually obeying that rule. And when it comes to regulatory language, that goes along with that piece and along with the Cannabis Division of Cannabis Control. How do you regulate all these home grow programs to make sure that they're not selling it as a product, which is another piece to it. Obviously, it creates a licensure fee and application fee for businesses who want to enter the market, but there isn't really a lot of regulatory language on that as well. So it's in its early stages. Obviously, as of right now, it seems like we're going to be opponents of it. However, once the bill gets introduced, we might move into the interested party space. But we're definitely keeping a close eye on this. If you have any questions about this bill or this bill that's currently being drafted, just let me know. I don't believe it'll be introduced before the winter break because there are a lot of things that they have to add to it, and a lot of the interested party individuals who were in that meeting had a lot of concerns and a lot of questions, a lot of things that they wanted added, but I do foresee it being introduced at some point during this General Assembly. I'm not quite sure when. So we will keep an eye out on that. Moving on, the USDA released rules for all hemp programs throughout the country. This is something that has been long coming. After the 2018 Farm Bill, the USDA was tasked with providing rules for hemp programs if the state chooses to create a hemp program. And a lot of states have gone on to create pilot programs, such as Kentucky. I think their pilot program has been functioning for about 5 years now, and they're really the industry standard. But they were kind of working in the dark, so to speak, because the USDA had not released rules on how these programs should function. So from that document, I believe it's a 131-page document, it's extremely long, there are some interesting things to note. One thing to note is the 2018 Farm Bill, so the bill that legalized the growing of hemp, allows for interstate transportation and shipment of hemp in the United States. This has very large implications when it comes to the movement of CBD products throughout the country. I know the Department of Agriculture, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, is currently building a workforce to go into stores throughout the state, test CBD products to make sure that they have what they say they have in them. But if we're talking about interstate commerce, that does make things a little tricky. And then when it comes to internet sales and stuff like that, I have no idea how they're going to regulate that. So that's one thing that's interesting to note. One thing that the USDA said in that report is the producer interest in hemp production is largely driven by the potential for high returns from sales of hemp flowers to be processed into CBD oil. So what does that mean? That means that the main reason why farmers are growing hemp is for the CBD market, right? They're not necessarily using hemp for textiles or paper or other sorts of other resources within that realm. They're mostly selling it and mostly creating it for the CBD oil market, which is also very interesting to note. I believe when the hemp bill was going through General Assembly, a lot of organizations came forward and said, oh, you know, we can create textiles from this, clothing from this, paper from this. But now the USDA is saying, well, really the big market is the CBD market. And because of the lack of regulation within that market, that is very problematic. And lastly, another thing to note, the USDA defines hemp as cannabis that has 0.3%, that has a THC level of 0.3% or less in it. And anything that has 0.3% or more is considered marijuana. There is the addition of a distribution range. So if, for example, you have a plot of land, you have hemp being grown there, and a regulatory body takes a sample of that product, if the distribution range has that 0.3% in it, it is still considered hemp. So, for example, if you have a lab that pulled a sample from a plot of, hemp, and the hemp THC level ranges from 0.29 to 0.41, because that 0.3% THC level is within that range, it still counts as hemp, which is interesting to note. And vice versa, if the range is outside of that 3%, let's just say the range is 0.33 to 0.41, it's considered marijuana. So they're kind of broadening that 0.3% number to allow for differences, because growing hemp is very difficult. The THC percentage can change depending on the amount of water and the type of soil. So they made that distinction to address that. And those are 3 big points. There are a couple more points that I have, but given the time, I'm going to move on and let Marcie speak about the medical marijuana program. But if you have any questions or want a little more information about that, feel free to contact me via email or call.
Well, good morning, everyone. I was sitting here thinking that even just a couple of years ago, if we'd been sitting here and taking this much time talking about cannabis products and regulations and rules and legislation around cannabis, it was beyond my thinking that this would even be a possibility. But here we are with it. And I'm going to spend just really quickly going through the medical marijuana control program and to see, just kind of where the updates are on that. You can see that basically cultivators are at the same point. They're still not up to full speed to have all of the cultivators having their certificates of operation. So that's slowing down. The dispensaries are coming up. We're just 14 shy of what their goal is for dispensaries in the state of Ohio. Next slide here is that the sales continue to grow. As you can see here, there's a lot of marijuana going out. 4,700 pounds of marijuana plant material is a lot of plant material. And so you can see that the numbers continue to go up. And then the processors we still have, which is interesting because that keeps us in the plant material area until the processors come online with their certificates of operation, which there are only 12 of now, and there will be 41 of them. We're not getting the products that we anticipate, such as the foods and the vaping and the patches and the lotions and all those types of things. So we'll watch that continue to go up. Next slide. And here we can see, kind of where we are in the recommendations. We already have in the state of Ohio almost 69,000 individuals, or recommendations rather, meaning that there are over 69,000 that truly are registered individuals in this patient program. And you can see here who the patients and the veteran status, the indigent status, and also the registered caregivers at that point. They all continue to keep, looks like I made a mistake there on the registered caregivers, but they continue to go up. Physicians, too, are up to now 584 physicians that have that CTR behind their credentials when they are, you have your MD and your OD, and now the CTR means that individual has gone through his 2 or her 2 hours of training to make them officially good at recommending this product. So we'll see how that continues to roll out. Next slide. We're also finding that along the way that there was a part in the legislation that was for a minority setback, or set aside rather, for dispensaries and also for cultivators and processors. And the state of Ohio did that because it's kind of standard fare for the state to do that, is to make sure that there's a carve out for the minority businesses. But that's been challenged in the court system. And so we have in Madison County and also Franklin County, judges that have ruled that there is no such thing as a need for a minority business set aside at this point. So it opens it up to anybody, and we know during the process of licensing, there were potentially some people that didn't get licenses because of the minority set aside. So we'll see how that plays out. How that potentially plays out is that we'll have more cultivators. We could have more processors. We could have more dispensaries because there were people that were not allowed to get those certificates based on that set aside. So be something to watch. I've been curious for a long time as a member of the Medical Marijuana Control Program Advisory Committee as to what they're saying about vaping, and yesterday I was able to connect with the individuals of the program in the state of Ohio. And the email that I got in return from that basically said that the program has banned vitamin E acetate from being involved in any vaping products in the state of Ohio under the guidance of the CDC and the FDA. That was interesting because that just, as Nathan said, that just came out on Friday. So I'm not quite sure what was going on prior to that. But they have been instructed in sending out communications, and my understanding, to patients telling them to refrain from using vaping or vaping and using e-cigarettes since this issue and crisis has come up. The vaping products that people have purchased at the state-sanctioned dispensaries can now, by the patient, can be taken back to the dispensaries for a cash refund. They cannot exchange it for another product. They can only get a cash refund. So that is happening now. And of course, the patients are being instructed to monitor for any symptoms or any problems health-wise that might be related to this and get to their doctor as soon as possible. Likewise, if there's any adverse events that come out of the using of vaping in the state of Ohio, they are, and that are not life-threatening or they're not really too concerned about, but yet are something that need to be noted. They are inquired or they're encouraged to call the toll-free helpline and report that so that the state of Ohio, as with all states, can continue to gather information about the use of these products. And then finally, it has been a while, to my chagrin, but it's been a while since the advisory committee has had a meeting. In fact, I believe the last one was in August, and so December 12th will be the next one. The chair of the advisory committee has retired, and the initial chair, the original chair, has retired, and so a new chair had to be appointed, and it took a while for that to happen. And my understanding is it had to be a pharmacist that was a part and member of the State of Ohio Board of Pharmacy, and so we do have someone on the committee, Megan Marshall, that is now going to take over that position as the chair of that committee. And then the individual who is to represent patients and the industry has been changed out, and the Speaker of the House appointed Christopher Stock. Christopher Stock was an attorney that is very much involved in the industry of medical marijuana and certainly was one of the individuals back in 2015 when Issue 3 was on the ballot that was strongly behind it. So he comes in sort of a new place on this advisory committee. So that's the update on the committee. And I don't believe I have anything else, do I? That's it.
Well, thank you, Marcie, for that. I know we are over time, so I will leave the next couple of minutes open for questions. If you have a question for either me, Derek, Marcie, or Nathan, feel free to type them in, send them in. But on the minority set-aside note, I do know that when the medical marijuana program was still under discussion and going through the legislature, and even after the fact, that is something that the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus was very passionate about. They, in a closed-door meeting between them and the Chamber of Commerce, they really hit on that note, and they wanted to make sure that businesses didn't improperly take advantage of the minority set aside. So now that a judge has kind of struck that from the program, I'm interested to see what their stance will be on the medical marijuana program, because I do know that the cannabis industry as a whole has really marketed itself to communities of color to say that this is a way that communities can kind of fix the systemic financial setbacks that a lot of them face on a day-to-day basis by entering the market. And now that you have this minority set aside being struck, what does that say about the push for recreationalizing marijuana when there is no guarantee that communities of color can really benefit from that? If a state-sponsored regulatory program can't guarantee that minorities get that, set aside. I mean, what can we say about the recreational piece? So that's just something interesting to note that I want to add. So I see we have one question for Derek. So Derek, the question is, which of the bills allows for kiosks in veteran/fraternal clubs?
Great question. So that would be House Bill 194. While both versions, the Senate version and the House version, allow for mobile wagering would have to be set up at one of the 11 brick and mortar, either casinos or racinos. But for House Bill 194, that would also allow for sports betting kiosks at all of the fraternal organizations or veterans clubs throughout Ohio, which is several thousand.
Awesome, thank you for that. And we have another question for Nathan, which is regarding the article about the Juul knowledge for teen addiction. I will have Nathan send that out after the fact. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm going ahead and I'm going to wrap up this webinar. Feel free to send me additional questions via email. Feel free to call. But we have a couple documents that we'll be sending out afterwards. So that should be good. And thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.